And we all know that Phil Jackson is an incredibly wise man, particularly when it comes to the game of basketball and what it takes to win. And so understanding the attributes that Carmelo Anthony brings to the table, I mean, nothing but profound respect for Phil Jackson, but what do you want, a cookie? I mean, the fact of the matter is that's the obvious way to go. There's no marquee free agent that's going to be available this summer that you could pick to replace the loss of a Carmelo Anthony.
Right.
Carmelo Anthony is one of the top 3 to 5 offensive players in the game of basketball. When he is on his A game, it is an argument whether or not he or Durant is the greatest scorer in the game. This is what they bring to the table. And if you're Phil Jackson, whether you're running a triangle or something else, the reality is that in the game of basketball, something always breaks down. And when crunch time arrives, it's not just about being efficient and effective, but it's also about having somebody that can close the deal for you and take you to the promised land when all else fails. He had it in Jordan. He even had it in Kobe. Not Shaquille O'Neal, because Shaquille O'Neal was the most dominant man in the game.
Sure.
But obviously the hack of Shaq philosophy was incorporated when all else failed, and you didn't want to give the ball to Shaq because you knew teams were going to foul him intentionally, and it was Kobe Bryant that had to be that dude.
Right.
And he had it in Jordan. He had it in Kobe. And Carmelo Anthony is more than capable of filling that void offensively. So Phil saying what he said in terms of committing to Melo, I don't blame him, and I totally know that Carmelo Anthony that you saw in that soundbite, because that's how he talks to me whenever we talk. He is always, I've known Carmelo Anthony for a decade, and Carmelo Anthony has never been one that has been unwilling to learn or unwilling to do what it takes. The difference is that if he doesn't have the pieces around him, he's going to believe in himself before he believes in anybody else. The challenge is going to be for Phil to get him to trust people who may not be worthy of being trusted, but that's also going to be easy for Carmelo to do with Phil because Carmelo admires, talks to often, works for, and listens to MJ. And MJ would be quick to tell him about the attributes that Phil brings to the table and why Phil is somebody to listen to. And as a result of that, that could still have an impact. So we all know that.
Quick thoughts about what we have heard so far, which are just bits and pieces, snippets of this live press conference.
Yes.
I did cover Phil in Chicago, got to know him a little bit, interviewed him several times. I found him surprisingly low-key in his opening remarks. Didn't come across as wildly enthusiastic. Didn't seem like a guy who wanted to hit the ground running. Some of his answers came off to me as non-answer answers, where he just sort of did a little soft shoe around the issue. Now, maybe he needs time to delve into the issues before he goes on record about said issues. The only thing that caught my ear about Carmelo was he still has another level he can go to in his game. Well, clearly, we certainly agree with that. This man could get him to that level if they both so choose, because first Phil's going to have to choose Carmelo, and I'm not convinced that he thinks Carmelo is the answer. But as you say, how do you replace Carmelo Anthony? I don't know. So I'm going to guess that Phil wants Carmelo to stay. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not going to guess that Carmelo wants to stay because Stephen A. Smith told me yesterday he continues to hear, even after the Phil announcement, that Carmelo is still going to leave, right?
Yes, yes, and I'm glad you brought that up because it's something that I had to discuss on SportsCenter earlier this morning that I wanted to elaborate on extensively for this show. Carmelo Anthony's chances of staying with New York would vastly improve if Phil was willing to coach, because the impact that Phil would have on that locker room could resonate enough where it could sway Melo. James Dolan's #1 priority is to keep Carmelo Anthony. He wants to keep Carmelo Anthony in New York City, and he definitely has discussed that with Phil before they agreed to sign him. The thing about Phil is that I think what you're sensing with his reticence is that, Skip, he knows that he's not in control the way that he would be as a coach, because Carmelo Anthony is the one that has his rights at the end of the season to opt out and elect to move on or to stay. The reason why that's relevant is because if you're Phil Jackson and you have made a decision, you got to remember, just a year ago, Phil Jackson was willing to coach 41 home games for the Los Angeles Lakers. So you're willing to coach 41 home games for Kobe Bryant.
Yep.
But you're not willing to do that for Carmelo Anthony. You know, even though you're getting paid $60 million to be the president of basketball operations. Carmelo Anthony is going to look at that. That's not going to be the finite thing that makes his decision, but he's going to look at that. When you have Steve Kerr, the reason why I want to elaborate about SportsCenter is because I don't want people taking it wrong that in any way am I trying to be disrespectful to Steve Kerr.
Yeah.
He is a champion. He's highly knowledgeable about the basketball game.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of his. I like him personally. He does a great job, and he was a good executive in Phoenix. But there are drivers and there are riders, as a few Hall of Famers always told me. You got Michael Jordan and the Kobes of the world that drove the bus, and then you have the Craig Hodges, the B.J. Armstrongs, the John Paxsons, the Steve Kerrs that are riders. And if you are going in the face of Carmelo Anthony and trying to sway him to stay on board, it would have much more of a profound effect if I'm looking at that dude that I'm going to be talking to every day as the coach and Phil Jackson, as opposed to a Steve Kerr. That's all I'm trying to say, and that's what they got to consider with Carmelo.